Hi, everybody. Today's Tuesday, December 9th, 2025, and our dear friend John Kiriakou is here with us. Welcome back, John.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let me start, John, with the case of Charlie Kirk. And every time we hear someone from FBI talking about it, and the only journalist, as I know, is pursuing is somehow investigating the case of Charlie Kirk is Candace Owens. She's doing everything to find out who was behind the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which is so important to the people, the basis, the foundation of MAGA movement who voted for Donald Trump, the current administration. And here is what Kash Patel said on Megyn Kelly's show about the case of Charlie Kirk.
Let me start with this, the most obvious. Do you believe that we have the proper suspect in custody? Do you believe that Tyler Robinson is, in fact, the man who killed Charlie Kirk?
Yes.
Do you believe he acted with the help of anyone else?
This investigation is being led by the Utah state authorities because it is a murder investigation. So the FBI is a supporting role in the investigative process. And so what we're doing is the same thing we did in the pipe bomb investigation. The investigation is ongoing for us. If there's any new leads or tips, we are exhausting them with search warrants and legal process. But at the same time, we are working with the prosecutors in Utah to make sure we don't screw up their investigation. Because again, the worst outcome would be if the guy that killed Charlie Kirk walks out of a United States courtroom in the state of Utah. And so it's a delicate balance again, but there is no way this FBI is going to stop that investigation until it reaches its all-conclusive endpoint.
Do you believe any foreign government had a role in his assassination?
At this time, the FBI doesn't have credible information to connect any foreign governments to it. But as I said, we are continuing to take investigative leads. We're not done. Just because we arrest someone, just like in the pipe bomber case, we don't just say, okay, we're done, on to the next. The investigative team continues to work with the Utah authorities, and they're deriving their own leads and coming back to us and say, hey, can you look at this piece of information? Can we get a search warrant on this account? What about this individual who is located in X, Y, or Z? We're tracking all that down.
Do you have any credible reason to believe that anyone connected with the Turning Point organization had anything to do with Charlie's death?
Zero.
On the subject, there's been an allegation made by prominent podcaster Candace Owens that she's received a death threat, a credible death threat from the French, that a threat has been made on her life, and that the French, she's been told, also may have had a role in Charlie's assassination. Have you looked into either of those? Do you believe she's received a credible death threat from the French, or that the French had something potentially to do with Charlie's death?
Any American that receives a death threat from overseas or anywhere in America is going to be fully investigated. So we're not going to turn our eye away from that investigation or any others. If there's anything to it, this FBI will respond to it.
Yeah, I think, John, first, he said that he believes that the guy Tyler Robinson has assassinated Charlie Kirk. Then he said that the investigation is going on in the state of Utah. They're doing this and that. But how you can say 100% is this guy, but the investigation is not done yet? What is your understanding of what's going on with the case of Charlie Kirk?
I should preface my comments by saying that I don't have any inside information. I'm seeing the same kind of information that you're seeing. Based on what the state of Utah has released, it seems like Tyler Robinson was the person who killed Charlie Kirk. He said to his friends in advance that he was going to kill Charlie Kirk. After he did it, he texted his girlfriend and said that he had killed Charlie Kirk, and they've gotten him. Like you, I'm very interested in these other avenues that may or may not be pursued right now. I can tell you that in my own case, once I was charged with a crime, the FBI just stopped. They just stopped and they moved on to the next person. Why they are continuing to investigate when there doesn't seem to be any evidence that others were involved is interesting to me. I don't understand why. He did say something very important at the beginning, Nima. He said that the state of Utah is handling this case. I said from the very beginning that I just simply did not understand why the FBI was involved in the investigation into the Charlie Kirk assassination. The alleged shooter is from Utah. The crime took place in Utah. The shooter began the crime in Utah, driving from the south to the north to carry out the shooting. This is a state crime. It has nothing to do with the FBI. So I was glad that Kash Patel was very clear in that the FBI is a support organization for the state of Utah. It's not leading this case. And I think that's why we're not getting any more information. I mean, you know as well as I do, there's been almost nothing released since the days immediately following Charlie Kirk's assassination. I think it's because it's a state case, and the state just has chosen not to release any information.
They didn't even mention, we don't know if they have evaluated his body, if, there has to be these sort of investigations going on. But as you've mentioned, there is nothing coming out of FBI or the State Department or somewhere. I don't know. I said this, the state of Utah publishing anything of that sort. That's why everybody's, these podcasters are talking about what has happened, where is the evidence for, we had Larry Johnson on this podcast arguing that there are a lot of evidence, that shows the opposite way. That shows that the guy, Tyler Robertson, would not be the assassin, would not be the guy who killed Charlie Kirk. But after all, there has to be some sort of, clarification on the part of the FBI, for example, which was since the investigation has started, they've been involved in the whole process. But nothing is coming out. Even Kash Patel, you look at the responses that he's giving on this podcast, it's just 2 words, nothing more than that.
Yes, no.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why that brings a lot of doubts in the mind of those people who are hearing these people.
And Dan Bongino did the same thing about a week ago. He was asked repeatedly. He gave 1-word answers and just said that there was nothing else to release. He said that as a news commentator, when he was a news commentator, yes, of course, he could opine and offer up his views or his ideas or his analysis. As the deputy director of the FBI, he has to follow the evidence. And he said there's just no evidence that anybody else was involved. Now, I hope you don't mind my saying this, before we started the live stream, you and I were having a conversation offline, and we were talking about how in the old days, let's say around the days of the Kennedy assassination, people believed their government. People wanted to believe that the government was telling the truth. And now in 2025, people don't believe that the government is telling the truth. They always believe that there's more to the story because, in fact, over the years, that has proven to be the case. And so I can understand why people are just not accepting this notion that Tyler Robinson was acting alone. I can understand why people want to see information leading to a hidden hand in a killing as high profile as Charlie Kirk's.
Yeah. Here is what Candace Owens said, John.
There's been an allegation made by...
But this FBI will respond to it.
Okay, but so far, no.
So we are just looking at everything that comes in. We're not going to reject any piece of information. If someone feels that their life is being threatened, we are, of course, looking at it.
Do you want to involve me in you looking at it? Because actually it kind of left me on red. There has been no communication with the FBI. You are aware right there. Megyn Kelly is asking you directly about it, so you can't pretend you didn't receive it. And you are choosing to skip over. He completely skips over the part about me having asserted, which Megyn asks him directly, was France involved in Charlie Kirk's assassination? He doesn't even address that. Skips right over it and instead says, if any American has a threat, that's what we're here for. And she's like, okay, but was there actually a threat on if anybody, let's just kind of state it more broadly, we will take it seriously. Well, you're not doing that, Kash Patel. And I find it very odd that I said that I had proof that the government of France was involved in Charlie Kirk's assassination, that they were on the ground that day. And you have not reached out to me. In this very interview that you are asserting that you are certain that Tyler Robinson is the only person involved, how can you be certain if you are not reaching out to people that claim to have verifiable evidence which could dispute that narrative? Does it seem to you like he's telling the truth there? Does it seem to you like he's being open, he's being transparent, or does it seem like he's intentionally being cagey because he knows that I am telling the truth, despite the many millions of dollars that is being spent on this Operation Mockingbird 2.0 campaign? Kash Patel knows that I am telling the truth.
Yeah. She's just
And Mrs. Macron is a man.
Go ahead, John.
Well, what can you say? I'll start by saying I believe that Candace Owens believes that this is an international conspiracy. I do not think it's an international conspiracy. I would be surprised if the French government even knew who Charlie Kirk was. I highly, highly doubt that the French government wanted Charlie Kirk dead or had any reason to make Charlie Kirk dead. It just doesn't make any sense. You know, Candace Owens says that she has irrefutable proof. She also said she had irrefutable proof that the Italian government stole the 2020 election from Donald Trump. I remember that because I was on the conference call when she said it, and that as soon as this irrefutable proof was released to the public, it would bring down the Italian government and Donald Trump would be inaugurated again on January the 20th, 2021. Of course, that was ridiculous. And none of it ever happened. So Candace Owens has a great following. She has millions of people that listen to her. She's very, very bright. But she comes up with a lot of crazy stuff. She claims to have irrefutable proof, and then she never puts up.
Yeah. But if something, she says that she has been threatened by the government in France because
right.
What is that? If something of that sort is happening, what is the role of FBI or CIA?
Well,
or do they really consider?
That's a good question. And it's actually something that I'm glad she brought up because I'll give you my own experience too. I am nowhere near the league of Candace Owens, but I get death threats on a regular basis as well. I'm out there like you are on the internet. I'm former CIA. Some people love me. Some people hate me. So I get death threats. I report every single threat to the FBI on the FBI's webpage where they have a drop-down menu. You can report crimes. The FBI has never, ever reached out to me, ever, not a single time. They don't care that John Kiriakou is getting death threats, just like they don't care if Candace Owens is getting death threats. They don't have the manpower to care when they have major crimes that they're investigating. So do I believe she got death threats? Yeah. And I believe that she believes the threats came from the French government. They came probably from some guy who was drinking too much and may or may not have had a French accent and, who emailed her or called her in the middle of the night. I'll tell you, just a few days ago, I got a death threat. It was 3:25 a.m. I don't have my ringer on in the middle of the night. So this idiot called me, threatened to kill me in a voicemail. And he used his own phone, his cell phone. Well, I have been verified. So I went to binverified.com. I put in the phone number. It gives me his name, his address, his phone number, and it confirmed the phone number and his social media. So rather than report it to the FBI because they do nothing, I texted him and I told him that if he ever did something like that again, I was going to tear off his head and shove his head up his ass. And I said, and I'm going to do that at 321 Main Street. I put his home address. He immediately messaged me back and he said, I'm so sorry. I was drunk. I don't like you. And I watch your videos and they made me angry. And I found your number online. And I said, yeah, don't do it again because next time I'm not going to be so nice about it. And I haven't heard back. But the FBI is not going to do it for you. The FBI is not going to protect you. I still don't think that she was threatened by the French government. That wouldn't make any sense at all. And I'll tell you one other thing about the French. When I was at the CIA, the French DGSE, the French intelligence service, had a reputation whereby they would take care of people that they considered to be a problem very quickly and very quietly. So if you were an Al-Qaeda figure in the Sahel, you were going to get a bullet in your brain. And the French weren't going to make threats about it in advance. They were just going to go in and kill you. If you were an anti-French environmental activist in the South Pacific, they're going to blow up your boat and they're going to kill everybody on it. They don't need to make a preface. They don't need to call and threaten you and warn you. If the French want you dead, you're going to be dead. And that's why I don't think she was threatened by the French government. They don't make threats.
Yeah. John, you mentioned the Middle East. When you look at the situation in the Middle East today, and you have a lot of experience, and you know the region, these officers, CIA officers that go to the Middle East, do they have any sort of strategy? Do they know of the U.S. strategy in the Middle East, or they're giving them some sort of missions, some sort of duties to
Right?
What is that? Because after all, when you are a CIA officer or someone who's working for CIA, you just see that as a duty, or you want to know a bigger picture of what's going on? Because
that's a great question, Nima. That's an important question. First of all, most of the officers that the CIA sends to the Middle East are not Middle East experts and do not speak Arabic. Almost none of the CIA's officers in the Middle East have a long-term view. And it's because the American government usually does not have a long-term view. The CIA has something called operating directives, OD. And it goes from a level 0, which means they're coming over the embassy walls right now, to level 5, which means, if you happen to hear anything about, growing corn in Morocco, just send us a little message. So tier 0, level 0 is the most important. That is like nuclear proliferation, Iran, the war in Russia and Ukraine, that kind of thing is tier 0. Tier 1 means drop what you're doing and focus on this. And it's things like terrorism, for example, or threats to an American embassy. And then it goes down from there, tier 2, 3, 4, to the point where nobody really cares about the lower tiers. But that's not to say that any of these tiers are for a long-term view. This was one of the things that I enjoyed the most when I was serving in the Middle East as an analyst. It's because your job was to look at the long-term view. I was interested in, let's say, Saudi stability over the next 30 years. That's interesting to me. What's not interesting is what's going to happen in the next 24 hours in Sudan, for example. I really don't care. But a lot of CIA people do care. And so they're going to be focused on Sudan in the next 24 hours, so the next 48 hours, or what happens in the next round of talks in Libya, as another example. Or what's happening, is Yemen going to split back into 2 different Yemens? And I think that, frankly, it does a disservice to the policymaker, because the policymaker, for the most part, can get that information by reading the New York Times or Al Jazeera or the Washington Post. So the CIA is not adding anything to the body of intelligence. It should be focused on the long term, and it's not.
And whose decision is that for this sort of policy? Mm-hmm. Is that coming from the president and his office?
Yeah, it originates in the National Security Council. So these are supposed to be the issues that are the most important for the president. and for policymakers at that level, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Advisor. And then those orders come down to the CIA director, and from the CIA director to the operational division directors. So every year in December, let's say I'm working for Near Eastern operations, the division director is going to say, okay, everybody in the Near East division, this is what we're going to collect on over the next year. We're going to collect on Iran and the nuclear program and Syria and what China's doing in the Middle East, things like that, things that are the most important. And then if you happen to pick up something that is less important but still interesting, write it down, send it in, and we'll let the analysts have it.
Then do they consider the feedback they're getting from their officers for example, in the region, to see what is their take, what is their understanding of what the situation there? Because after all, when you have someone on the ground gathering information, his view, his sort of understanding would be important. Is that
you are
really
so
care
right?
About it?
You are so right. And the obvious answer should be yes, that they're very focused on that. Unfortunately, the true answer is no, they don't care. And I'll give you an example. This is a dated example. I was writing a paper. I was still on the analytics side. I was writing a paper that touched on women's role in politics in a Middle Eastern country. And there was one woman in particular that I was very interested in because she was out there in the media all the time, fighting for the women's right to vote, and a real leader where the international media were seeking her out and getting her opinion. She was very outspoken. She would come to the United States and speak to women's groups. So I sent a cable through, there's a tasking office at the CIA. So I went to this tasking office and I said, I have these 8 questions about this woman. Could you send the questions to the station and have the station assign an officer to find the information that I need? So they did. And about 3 weeks later, I got a very short cable in response to my questions. And it said, oh yes, this woman is well known to us. We call her the hot dog lady, because we understand that when she was living in the United States, she loved hot dogs. And here in the Middle East, it's hard to find hot dogs. And so she has them shipped from somewhere, Beirut or something. And she likes them with mustard and relish and this and that. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? I can't send this to the president. And so I went back to the tasking office and I said, this was a complete failure to collect the information necessary to send to the president. I can't tell the president in response to his question, should I take this woman seriously because she wants to meet at the White House? I can't say, well, I don't know if you should take her seriously, but she really loves hot dogs, and this is what she likes on her hot dogs. That was when I learned that there was a real split between the Directorate of Operations and the Directorate of Intelligence. And the Directorate of Operations was going to do its thing, and it didn't care what the Directorate of Intelligence was writing and sending to the president.
Yeah. John, one of the reason I ask you this question is the situation in Ukraine, because we know what's going on in Ukraine in terms of what is happening to the military of Ukraine. Is, Russia is somehow advancing on the ground, but how do you see the role of the CIA in gathering information from Ukraine on the ground, the information that are first-hand information? I'm not talking about they're getting it from, British or any other intelligence. Are they really getting the information directly from Ukraine, or they're getting through these channels?
It's my understanding that there are CIA officers, senior CIA officers, stationed inside the Ukrainian intelligence service to provide support and liaison. And there are CIA officers on the ground with Ukrainian military or special forces units. In addition, we know that the CIA is training Ukrainian military officers here in the United States at bases in Texas and I think North Carolina. So yeah, the CIA is getting the information directly from the horse's mouth, but the Ukrainians are losing. This war is untenable. Every observer will tell you that the Russians control the line of demarcation. And in the end, CIA or no CIA, the Ukrainians are going to have to come to some kind of an agreement with the Russians. This is one of those situations, Nima, where the CIA is not going to be able to win this thing for the Ukrainians. This is going to have to be between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And sure, CIA help may have delayed a Russian victory, may have cost the Russians, more casualties, but it can't go on forever.
Yeah. John, we know what has happened in 2014 in Ukraine with the coup.
Mm-hmm.
But do you see the same sort of policy happening in the aftermath of any Ukrainian settlement? Because what Russia sees in Ukraine today is they want a permanent solution to the case of Ukraine and a security architecture for the region. You cannot, make obstacles for CIA, MI6, or these intelligence, so Russian intelligence as well. They're doing their job. It's common. It's normal to do that. But when it comes to the securities of these superpowers, you have to have some sort of limitation to the activities that you're,
Yes.
committed to. Is that going to be considered? Do you see that sort of will in the Trump administration to consider that?
I think so. I agree with you. Whatever solution the two sides come to, in the end, it has to be a permanent solution. And I think we've seen the indications of what that solution is going to be. It's going to have to be that the Russians keep Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Crimea. The Russian-speaking areas that they control de facto now, I think they'll end up controlling formally once this is over. I think that another Russian red line is that Ukraine cannot ever be a member of NATO. But that's a misnomer, Nima, because Ukraine doesn't have to be a member of NATO. Australia is not a member of NATO. Japan, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, UAE, they're not members of NATO. They're what's called major non-NATO allies. That's an official status. And I wouldn't be surprised if the United States agrees with the Russians that no, Ukraine should not be a member of NATO. It will never be a member of NATO, but it could be granted major non-NATO ally status, thus giving it essentially the same rights as a NATO country. And I think what the Russians will concede is that Ukraine will get fast-track membership in the European Union. And then the EU begins the rebuilding of Ukraine, and that's going to be the end of it. But I really do believe that we're nearing the end, and the end is not going to be what the United States and Ukraine have hoped for, but it's going to be enough to put this thing to rest.
Many people believe, at least in our audience, that CIA is part of deep state. CIA is, do you think that the leadership usually in CIA is part of the establishment, or the establishment has a lot of leverage on CIA in the way that they're using CIA?
No, I agree that there is a deep state. And the CIA is an important, probably the most important part of the deep state. But let's define what a deep state is. In my view, a deep state is a group of unelected, very powerful bureaucrats that can do what the president wants, or they can ignore what the president wants, because presidents come and go every 4 years or every 8 years, and these deep state leaders are in their positions for 20, 30, even 35 years. Presidents come and go, and these deep staters remain. And so if there's a policy that a president supports or wants, and it's a policy that the deep state leadership does not like, they just wait until the president's not president anymore.
They did
Yeah.
that during the first Trump administration.
That's
with the
exactly
case
what
of
they
Syria.
did. You're exactly right. That's what we saw. Mhm.
What is the relationship between, for example, the position of Tulsi Gabbard and the head of CIA, and how they interact, and who has the upper hand?
Right. So Tulsi Gabbard is the director of national intelligence. John Ratcliffe, of course, is the director of the CIA. The CIA director technically falls underneath the DNI, but in reality, on a day-to-day basis, that's just not true. Depending on who happens to be president, the CIA director can be a member of the cabinet. He is a member of this cabinet. Presidents can choose, for example, among CIA director, DNI, and ambassador to the United Nations, who gets a cabinet position. The way the office of the DNI was first established, the DNI was supposed to be the overall coordinator of all of the 18 intelligence agencies in the US government. 18 intelligence agencies in the US government. What that meant, for all practical purposes, was that the DNI had control over the budget. But don't forget that fully half of those intelligence agencies are actually parts of the Pentagon. And so in the end, the DNI doesn't have authority over those. The Secretary of Defense has authority over those. Over the years, over the last 20 years, more and more authority has been absorbed by the DNI. The President's Daily Brief used to be a CIA-only publication. Now it's a DNI publication. Major operations, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Russia, China, used to be solely the domain of the CIA. Now they fall under the DNI. So it's almost as though we have two CIA directors who are competing with each other for primacy. So far, this has been very quiet in the Trump administration, but it looks like John Ratcliffe has not had the PR problems that Tulsi Gabbard has had. I've heard rumors recently that Pete Hegseth will likely not be Secretary of Defense for very much longer, and that Tulsi Gabbard might become the Secretary of Defense. We have to wait and see. But the bottom line is that there's no clear division between DNI and CIA. It's just something that is fought out on an ad hoc basis.
But we know that Tulsi Gabbard is not happy with the case of, for example, Venezuela. She
Yes.
came out and said that the regime change doesn't work. The United States doesn't benefit from regime change.
Correct.
But on the other hand, you see the policy of the Trump administration is somehow is the regime change. They're
Yes.
officially saying that.
Yes.
Not just the Trump administration. Most of Republicans who are in line with the Trump administration, they say that regime change, Maduro
Yes.
must go.
Right.
And
Yeah,
how
which is
would-
a stab to the heart of the MAGA movement. This is where the progressive left and the MAGA right meet and agree. No foreign interventions. And, this is different from Iraq, Afghanistan, so many other places where the US has intervened. We're not at war with Venezuela. The Venezuelans are no threat to us. And regardless of what the administration is saying, Venezuela is not an originator of drugs. And the drugs that do pass through Venezuela, primarily from Colombia and Ecuador, are on their way to West Africa for then transshipment to Western Europe. Those drugs don't come to the United States. My own view is this is all about China, and I'll explain why. Venezuela sits on an ocean of oil. That oil is very, very dirty. It's full of sulfur, and it requires specialty refining using very heavy chemicals. Well, that specialty refining, until about 5 years ago, could only be done at refineries in Houston, Texas. And then we put sanctions on the Venezuelan oil industry. Well, the Indians and the Chinese both built refineries that could purify dirty Venezuelan oil. And about 5 years ago, the Chinese announced that they were going to build a refinery to process Venezuelan oil in the Caribbean. Well, we can't admit we were wrong and lift sanctions. So what can we do to save face? We overthrow Maduro, try to install a friendly puppet government, lift sanctions, and we start refining Venezuelan oil anymore. So I think this is really about China more than anything else.
Yeah. I think the question would be, the day after Maduro is gone, who's going to be there? And
Well,
how can you be sure that she's going to be there?
It's not going to be Juan Guaido, whom nobody had ever heard of. It's not going to be this woman that just won the Nobel Peace Prize of all things.
Yeah. Maria Machado.
Thank you, Maria Machado. I couldn't even remember her name. Yeah, I think that, see, this is a lesson that we just seem to never learn. It's easy to overthrow a government, right? I mean, they actually teach you at West Point the modus operandi by which you can overthrow a government. You have to take control of the presidential palace and either arrest, kill, or exile the leader. You have to take control of the radio and television stations. You have to take control of the major intersections in the capital, and you have to have the support of the military. Well, we don't have the support of the Venezuelan military. Maduro has the support of the Venezuelan military. So what does that mean? Does that mean we have to send in ground troops and fight a hot war on the ground in Venezuela when the Venezuelans are no threat to us? So I just don't see any upside to a policy of trying to overthrow the Venezuelan government.
Yeah. Here is John. Here is what Donald Trump said about Venezuela.
Are numbered and that the U.S. could soon strike Venezuelan territory. Could we see American troops on the ground in Venezuela?
I don't comment on that. I wouldn't say that one way or the other. I can say this, that he sent us millions of people, many from prisons, many drug dealers and drug lords, and mental institution, people in mental institutions. He sent them into our country where we had a very stupid president. You know that. Biden's a low IQ person, especially nowadays. I mean, he was low IQ 30 years ago, but he was especially low IQ now. And what he did to our country is not good. Tren de Aragua, the gangs, one of the meanest gangs in the world.
You've locked down the border now.
No, he sent a lot of these people. He also sends in a lot of drugs. So we'll see how it all works out.
So
But
do you
I
want
can't talk about
So
strategy.
how far would you go to take Maduro?
Yeah. John, the only thing that he has not blamed on Joe Biden is the way that he's sleeping right now when people are talking.
That's right. That's
You know,
right.
every time, any issue that he's talking about, once, he's mentioning Joe Biden and his administration, but you are the president of the United States right now. And people wants you to do whatever you have in your mind. They're not talking about Joe Biden and what was happening during the Joe Biden and his administration.
Right.
What is behind? I was talking with a psychologist about this sort of attitude on the part of Donald Trump. I know that you are trained in this direction. When you see someone like President Trump, he's the president of the United States. Why does he need every time to bring up Joe Biden to somehow legitimize what he's doing?
I think it's a personality quirk of his. I think that he thinks it helps to legitimize his policies, and I think that he sees it as a way of explaining his policies. That Joe Biden's policies were so bad that they all need to be scrapped or they all need to be fixed or changed. He's going to do it, but he's being forced to do it because the Biden policies were so bad, and Joe Biden is low IQ president, and Joe Biden was, in dementia, and I don't know. I will point out that none of what he said related to the emptying of prisons and mental institutions and sending people to the United States. None of that is true. That was true of the Cubans in 1978 and 1979 and the Mariel boat lift, where the Cubans really did empty their prisons and their mental institutions and put them on boats and send them to Florida. There's no evidence that that's ever happened coming from Venezuela.
John, with the regime change, you know about Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, right now Syria, we had the regime change. And when it comes to Venezuela, people here in Brazil and Latin America, there's so much concern about what's going on in Venezuela, if that would bring some sort of chaos in the region, the way that it was in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Right.
What is your take on this sort of chaos that could bring this sort of conflict could bring to the region? And how is it going to be beneficial to the United States after all? Because Maduro is saying that he's prepared to participate, to cooperate with the United States. If they want oil, he's going to send it. If they want to somehow, invest in Venezuela's, economy, they're open to that. There is no resistance from the government in Venezuela.
In fact, Maduro and Trump had a telephone conversation a week ago. Nima, when the major powers of the region, Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, are 100% against any American intervention in Venezuela, the Americans should sit up and take notice. When just about every country in the world has come out and said that they are against any American military intervention in Venezuela, then we should learn the lesson. I honestly, I don't see anything positive that comes out of a military intervention. It really will destabilize northern South America. It is going to damage our diplomatic relations with all of the countries that I just mentioned. And this is a more minor point, but I think still an important one. The country of Guyana has just discovered that it is also sitting on an ocean of oil that it is just now starting to lift with the help of American, Dutch, and British oil companies. What happens to the economic development of Guyana, which sits right alongside Venezuela? There's no upside. There's nothing good that can come out of a military intervention. And I'm hoping that it's just bluster. But I mean, we've sent a carrier battle group there. You're talking about 11 or 12 battle-ready ships. We're only a couple of hours flight to drop troops or special forces. So I'm worried about where this is going.
Yeah, the problem, by the way, with the Trump administration is that they're not communicating with anybody in Latin America.
No.
Just the guy in Argentina, Milei. The only guy who's close to Washington is the president of Argentina. The other presidents here in Brazil, they're not that much of communication between Brazil and Colombia, the same, because they see these people as radical left. They call it the radical left. I don't know what does that mean anymore. We don't have it here in Brazil.
My best friend from high school is a MAGA Republican, a strongly pro-Trump Republican. And every time I talk to him, he talks about the radical left, the radical left, the radical left. And I said, I have to ask you, what is it that's radical about the left? And he said, all their policies. I said, no, I'm serious. I want you to tell me what it is that's radical. And he said, well, like the environment. And I said, it's radical to want clean water and clean air. Well, and then that's it. That's the end of the conversation, because we've gotten to the point where these words don't mean anything. I remember at the end of the George W. Bush administration, the Republican National Committee circulated a memo. They got caught circulating a memo urging everybody who goes on a television news program to speak out against what they called Islamofascism. Well, the term, they just made up the term at the Republican National Committee, and it didn't catch on. It didn't catch on in part because somebody leaked the memo and said, the Republicans want us to all say Islamofascism so that we have something to rally against. And I think that's what we're seeing today with the radical left, the radical right. There's nothing radical. I joke all the time that in the United States, we have two political parties. We have a right of center party and we have a farther right of center party. There's nothing left about the Democratic Party. It's a capitalist party.
Yeah, I think they see socialism as the radical left, because socialism, after all, they want to make some sort of situation for those people who are not able to provide. They're having problems, but they see this as radical, as they saw it in New York with
Yes.
Zohran Mamdani.
Right.
The whole problem is that I think the oligarchs, these people who are, they own everything, social media, you name it, everything. They have everything, and they want to dominate the whole, political system. That's
Yes.
why they call it radical left. Whenever someone comes out, it's socialist, and I don't
Yeah.
know.
And they don't know
What
the
is
difference
radical
between
about socialism? I
Yeah.
don't see anything radical.
No. I'll tell you a funny little story. I years ago, during Trump's first term, my then wife and I were at a relative's house, one of her relatives' house, for Thanksgiving dinner. And I was sitting next to this old woman. She was in her 80s. She had Fox News on. And she says to me, "It looks like we're turning into a communistic country." And I said, "Yeah, you think so?" And she said, "Well, all this socialism." And I said, "You know what? You're right. This socialism, like Social Security. What is Social Security after all? It's free money for old people who were too stupid or too lazy to save for their old age. I'm against this kind of socialism." And she looks at me and she says, "I live on Social Security." I said, "But that's a socialistic program." And she said, "Well, I think we need programs like that." I said, "Oh, well, then maybe it's okay if we're turning into a socialistic country." But another problem is Americans have no idea the difference between socialism and communism. And I'll give you another example. I read my small hometown newspaper every day. And there's a very popular Mexican restaurant that's there. And there was an article saying that when you go to this Mexican restaurant and you leave a tip, the tip doesn't go to the worker. It goes to the owner of the restaurant. And in the comment section under the article, somebody wrote, "That's socialism for you." So I wrote a comment and I said, "Actually, that's capitalism. Socialism would be if the workers owned the restaurant." And I said, I took a shot. I couldn't help it. But I said, "It sounds like you're in need of a 6th grade government class if you don't know the difference between socialism and capitalism." But that's America. That's just the way it is here. People don't know.
You know what's amazing? Here in Brazil, we have some sort of socialist, government. But what is the main goal? Lula government, just mentioning before wrapping up, John. We have two system, healthcare system. One of them is SUS, they call it SUS. Everybody's covered by that. And the other one, you pay for that,
Same in Greece.
Yeah, it's amazing, John. It's amazing when you look at the system and how it works. If someone doesn't have any sort of, coverage from the, insurance and all the healthcare companies, they have it by free. They don't need to pay anything, and they're gonna get the pretty same, service.
Wow.
I think that's Many
That's
people.
that's an advanced society right there.
It's amazing, John. You have to be here and see how it works. And in my opinion, it works just fine.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's exactly how it is in Greece. The healthcare system is fantastic. They have a private system. All the private system does is it gets you moved closer to the front of the line. So if you use just the public system and you need a procedure, maybe it's going to take 11 or 12 months. If you have the private system, you can get the procedure in 1 or 2 months. That's the only difference.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, John, for being
Thank
with
you,
us
Nima.
today. Great pleasure as always.
The pleasure's all mine. I'm always happy to see you. Thanks for having me.
See you, John. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.